Kenichi is your average Japanese salaryman, and one day, while overworking himself as usual, he collapses to the floor. Normally, this would be where he gets sent to another world, but in Kenichi's case, he just survives and sues his company so he can retire on a farm. Life has been going pretty well for him, but all of a sudden, while he's making lunch for himself, he vanishes and appears in the middle of the forest. He tries looking around to figure out where he is, but all he finds is the skeleton of a fallen knight and a bunch of unfamiliar plants. He has watched a lot of anime in his lifetime, so he knows this is probably an Isekai adventure. To confirm it, he yells out "status window" to see if something happens. To his surprise, a status screen does indeed appear, so he is definitely stuck in another world, and honestly, he's fine with that. He checks out his status, but he's a bit confused since he can't see any HP bar on the screen. However, he does have his Amazon account, so he can still make as many impulsive purchases as he wants. He also has access to an item box, so he picks up a handful of weeds to test out what the item box can do. He puts the weeds in his item box and figures out that he can separate and retrieve the individual components from the items he puts in it. He also decides to test out the store, so he takes a look at it, but unfortunately, he still needs money to buy things. There's a prompt that says he's allowed to trade items in his item box for money, but right now, all he's got is a couple of weeds, and those aren't worth much. He has literally nothing valuable to trade for money, so at this rate, he's probably going to starve. But just then, he notices the shiny equipment on the dead knight, and since he's dead anyway, it's not like he needs it anymore. And the first thing Kenichi does is buy some daily necessities and some bread from the store. Afterwards, he buries the knight's skeleton to pay his respects and leaves the area on the new bicycle he bought. He's searching for some kind of settlement so he can talk to some people and earn some money, but he has no idea where he is. For now, he decides to just set up camp for the night since he's not going to find anything today. However, if he doesn't find a city, he plans to resell some of the things he buys from the store to gain a massive profit. If he does that, he should be able to survive and thrive in this world. But there's just one problem. Until now, Kenichi hadn't considered that it would be dangerous out in the middle of the woods. Once night falls, he gets surrounded by a pack of wolves, and they don't look like they are friendly. Kenichi freaks out because he knows he's dead meat if he doesn't act fast. So he turns to his store and immediately tries to purchase the biggest gun he can find. Unfortunately, guns aren't available, so he settles for the next best thing and buys a bunch of fireworks. The fireworks scare the wolves a little, but it's ultimately not enough to get rid of them. Kenichi starts looking for something else. He eventually finds a slingshot and uses it to fire balls at the wolves. The force from the balls is so strong that it knocks a couple of the wolves out and makes the rest reconsider their options, since Kenichi clearly isn't as easy a target as they thought. Once the wolves back off, Kenichi immediately rushes over to his bike and rides into the night to get as far away from wolf territory as possible. By the next morning, Kenichi is exhausted from all the biking he did, but he's still got no idea where he is. He buys a ladder and a telescope so he can climb up one of the trees and look at his surroundings. Thankfully, he manages to spot a city over in the distance, so he should be able to start earning money if he heads over there. He begins the long journey through the grasslands, but as he finally makes it to the main road, he nearly ends up getting run over in the process. The guy in the cart apologizes for nearly hitting him, and since he feels bad about it, he offers to give Kenichi a ride to the city. He introduces himself as Fuyo, a merchant, and the woman in the back of his carriage is traveling Bard, so she's a fellow passenger. While they ride, Fuyo mentions how Kenichi is dressed pretty strangely, so he asks him what he's heading to the city for, and Kenichi responds, saying he plans to open a business there. Eventually, they make it through the city gates, so Fuyo drops Kenichi off in front of his store and Kenichi helps him unload his cargo. Fuyo thanks Kenichi for his help, but Kenichi is the one who should be thankful here since really helped him out. To show his gratitude, he gives Fuyo a pouch of pepper, but once Fuyo realizes what this is, he warns Kenichi not to sell it in this city. There's a spice mafia called Bakeopa, and they have a total monopoly on the spice market, so if Kenichi tries to compete with them, they might send the Boeing assassin after him. Kenichi hadn't realized that simply selling his goods could be so dangerous, so he is thankful for Fuyo's warnings. Fuyo normally wouldn't want to risk drawing the attention of Bakeopa, but since it's a private deal between him and Kenichi, he decides to buy the pepper. Kenichi tries to tell him he doesn't have to pay for it, but Fuyo insists since a merchant never accepts anything for free because that would mean he owes Kenichi a favor. Kenichi can understand that, so he accepts Fuyo's payment, but even though he was giving Fuyo a discount, he still got a lot more than he was expecting. He only paid 1,000 yen for that pepper, but Fuyo paid him the equivalent of 100,000 yen for it. Kenichi walks around town for a bit, and he eventually finds a local inn and restaurant, so he heads in and is greeted by the hostess Azalea. He tells her he is here for lodging, and she would be happy to help with that, so she shows him to the front desk. The price for one room is 1 copper coin and payment has to be made up front, so Kenichi gives her the money. Now all she needs Kenichi to do is write his name in the contract, but Kenichi suddenly realizes that he doesn't know how to write in this country's language. Azalea notices Kenichi's strange clothing, so she asks if he's some kind of foreign ambassador, but Kenichi tells her that he's just in town because he wants to start up his own business. Azalea is supportive, but she doesn't think Kenichi will be accepted by the merchant guild since they require their members to be able to read, write, and do math, and he apparently can't. Kenichi is perfectly literate, but he just doesn't understand the language of this country, and as for math, he's pretty good at it, so that shouldn't be a problem. Azalea doesn't believe Kenichi really knows how to do math, so she asks him a basic multiplication problem to test him, and Kenichi answers instantly, basically making him a math genius in this world. Moving on, Azalea helps him write his name down on the contract, and since Kenichi needs to learn to read and write, he asks her if she would be willing to teach him this country's language. He offers to give her some candy in exchange for the language lessons, and as she hears candy, she's totally on board. It's basically impossible to get sweets in the kingdom of Kaden since only nobles ever get to buy things like this. In fact, if the nobles found out that she has such wonderful sweets, they would probably try to take them away from her, but she refuses to let that happen. After Azalea calms down from her sugar rush, she begins teaching Kenichi about this world's language, and it's pretty easy for him to understand since it's similar to the katakana of Japanese. The numbers also follow the same decimal system, so it's not long before Kenichi is able to read and write perfectly. Azalea is amazed that he was able to learn the language in just a few hours, and if he can do that, then he's definitely smart enough to make a good name for himself as a merchant. So she's starting to consider him as a good marriage partner. Kenichi thinks Azalea is joking since he is old enough to be her father, so he doesn't take her statement seriously. He finishes the portraits he had been drawing of her, and when Azalea sees it, she is overjoyed because it looks exactly like her, and normally only nobles get to have their portrait taken. Kenichi has given her delicious candy and drawn a portrait for her, so she can't let him go without giving him something in return, which is why she jumps on top of him, and that night, Kenichi makes it clap. The next morning, Kenichi arrives at the Merchant Guild and meets with one of the representatives because he wants to register with them. The representative gives him some paperwork to fill out, and once he's done with that, all he has to do is pay the registration fee, and he will officially be a member of the Merchant Guild. The registration fee is 1 silver, but that's like 50,000 yen, so he can't afford to pay it all at once and asks to pay it in installments instead. Thankfully, the guild allows partial payments, so Kenichi is now an official member of the Merchants Guild. The receptionist hands him an ID stick and tells him to have it visible whenever he is conducting business because it serves as proof that he is part of the Merchant Guild. Now that he has registered, Kenichi decides to take a walk around the market to figure out how much things cost around here, and overall, all manufactured goods are way more expensive than they would be if he bought them from his store. The only things that are reasonably priced are foods, so while Kenichi is there, he buys a bag of fruit from a vendor. The next day, Kenichi is working on creating a stand so he can sell his goods out in town, and Azalea is impressed by how easy it was for him to make it. While Kenichi is putting up a couple of flyers, Azalea notices that he's using clothespins, and she's really interested in these since their design is really cool. The clothespins that exist in this world are made of wood and a rubber band, but they break so easily that they are practically useless. She asks Kenichi if he's selling these as well, but Kenichi hadn't even considered the fact that something as simple as clothespins could be so valuable. Later that day, Kenichi heads out into the market for his first day as a merchant and finds a good spot next to an old lady. He asks her if she's fine with him setting up his stall here, and she has no problem with it, so Kenichi pulls his stall out of his item box. Anama is impressed by Kenichi's selection of goods, so she looks around for a bit and spots the clothespin he is selling. She really likes them, so she offers to buy a couple, and Kenichi is surprised since he didn't think she would want to support her competition. Anama points out that there's no rule saying she can't buy from him, and besides, she doesn't plan on having some sort of rivalry with him anyway. As the day goes on, Kenichi's stall begins attracting customers, so his goods are being sold fast. Specifically, the clothespins have become quite popular for their reliability, so Kenichi could probably make a living off selling those alone. However, he knows other people will eventually create similar clothespins, so he can't rely on them forever. Just then, a man comes over to Kenichi's stall, and from the fact that he has a sword on his hip and really nice clothes, Kenichi can tell that the guy must be a noble. The man says he wants to have a look at Kenichi's knife, so Kenichi lets him test it out. After the man is satisfied with the sharpness tests, he asks for the price. Kenichi tells him the knife costs 2 silver, and that's pretty expensive, but the man can understand why since this knife is excellently made. He would love to buy it, but he needs a blade that's slightly longer, so Kenichi checks his shop to see if there's anything bigger available, and eventually, he manages to find a katana. The man absolutely loves the katana, but Kenichi tells him the price is 1 gold coin. and that's really expensive, so the man isn't sure if he should buy it or not. While Kenichi watches the man try to convince himself that the sword is a necessary expense, a cat girl starts sniffing his face and licks him. This is the first time Kenichi has ever seen any beast folk, so he's a little scared at first, but he soon calms down and asks them what they would like to buy. They tell them they want the cloths that he is using to cover his stall, and those originally weren't meant to be sold, but Kenichi is a businessman, so if they want the cloths, then he will sell them the cloth. He tells them one cloth costs 3 copper pieces, but since they want to buy 3, he will give them a discount and only charge 8 copper instead. That's a good deal for them, but the beast folk are really bad at math, so they don't understand what Kenichi said at all and assume he's trying to scam them. The nobleman tells the beast folk that Kenichi is telling them the truth, so they don't need to worry about being scammed. So they take his word for it and buy the cloths. The man also decides to buy the sword since it is incredibly well made, so by the end of the day, Kenichi made a really good profit. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, a maid who bought Kenichi's clothespins shows them to her master Primula. Margaret asks Primula if they can use these in the mansion since they would make her work a lot easier, and Primula thinks that's a good idea, so she tells Margaret to go buy some more tomorrow. Better yet, she wants to sell these clothespins at her own company since this is a goldmine of opportunity, so she runs off to ask her father for permission. That evening, Kenichi is taking a bath by the well, and he really wishes he could have a warm bath, but those haven't been invented yet, so he's going to have to make one himself. He looks through the store to see if there's anything he could use to make the hot bath, and he happens to find a barrel for sale, so he intends to fill it with water and put it over a fire so he can experience a hot bath again. And if his idea works out, then he might be able to make some profit from it. That aside, Kenichi has been benefiting a lot from his online store screen, but he has no idea how it actually works or how the packages even get to him in the first place. To be honest, it's way too good to be true, so Kenichi worries it might steal his soul as compensation at some point, but for now, there's no use worrying about it, so he decides to go to sleep. Meanwhile, out in the forest, there's a little girl named Anemone, and she's currently on the run. This was the end of episode 1. Subscribe to not miss the next part.